September 23, 1944. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, 50 kilometers south of Berlin. Oberst Heinrich Müller stood in the morning cold, watching as a crew of Wehrmacht mechanics positioned a captured American M4 Sherman tank on the firing range. The tank sat there like a monument to industrial mediocrity, its boxy hull and riveted construction looking crude compared to the elegant, sloped armor of German panzers. Müller had spent 22 years in the panzer forces, from the earliest experiments with armored warfare through the lightning campaigns in Poland and France. He understood tanks the way a master craftsman understood his tools. He knew what made armor effective, what made guns lethal, what separated superior engineering from mass-produced adequacy. The Sherman sitting before him represented everything he'd been taught to dismiss about American industrial philosophy: quantity over quality, crude effectiveness over refined precision, acceptable performance rather than optimal design. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The test protocol seemed almost unnecessary. Everyone at Kummersdorf already knew what the results would show. A Panther tank, positioned 800 meters downrange, represented the newest standard in German armored warfare. Its frontal armor measured 80 millimeters thick, sloped at 55 degrees from vertical, creating an effective thickness of 140 millimeters against projectiles striking head-on. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun, according to all available intelligence and battlefield reports, couldn't penetrate that armor at any practical combat range. Müller watched as German gun crews loaded a 75mm armor-piercing round into the Sherman's main gun. The breech closed with a solid mechanical click. The gunner, a veteran panzer, crewman named Feldwebel Hans Schmidt, peered through the M4's optical sight and made minor adjustments to the gun's elevation. At Müller's signal, Schmidt pulled the trigger. The Sherman's gun fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the proving ground. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther's glacis plate with a bright flash of metal on metal. Müller raised his binoculars and studied the impact point. The round had struck dead center on the frontal armor, exactly where it would hit during a head-on engagement. The Panther's armor showed a shallow crater where the projectile had impacted, deformed, and bounced away harmlessly. No penetration. No catastrophic failure. The sloped armor had done exactly what German engineers had designed it to do, deflecting the American shell as if swatting away an insect. Schmidt fired again from 600 meters. Same result. A bright impact flash, a shallow crater, the projectile careening off into the dirt beyond. At 400 meters, close enough that American tank destroyers might attempt a shot during a desperate defensive action, the 75mm round still failed to penetrate. The physics were simple and undeniable. The Sherman's gun lacked sufficient muzzle velocity to defeat Panther armor at any range where a tank engagement would realistically occur. Müller made careful notes in his evaluation report, documenting what every panzer officer on the eastern and western fronts already knew from bitter experience. The American M4 Sherman was inferior to German medium tanks in the most fundamental measure of armored combat capability: the ability to kill enemy armor before that armor killed you. His report would confirm what Wehrmacht leadership wanted to hear. German engineering superiority remained intact, despite the tactical setbacks of recent months. Quality would ultimately triumph over the crude numerical advantages American industry could bring to bear. In the margin of his report, Müller added, a single observation that would prove far more prophetic than the test results themselves. He wrote, American tank demonstrates adequate mechanical reliability during transport and testing operations. Automotive components appear designed for sustained field use with minimal specialized maintenance. It was a throwaway comment, barely relevant to the primary evaluation of combat effectiveness. Müller noted it simply because his engineering training demanded comprehensive observation. He had no way of knowing that this casual remark touched on the fundamental reason why the Sherman would help win the war, while the magnificent Panther would help Germany lose it. By late September 1944, the tactical situation facing Wehrmacht armored forces had deteriorated with mathematical precision across every front. In the east, Soviet tank armies pushed relentlessly toward the Reich's borders, absorbing catastrophic losses, and replacing them with industrial output that seemed limitless. In the west, American and British armoured divisions pressed through France, their advance slowed, but never stopped by the bocage fighting that had consumed July and August. German Panzer divisions that had destroyed entire Soviet armies in 1941 now found themselves fighting desperate defensive actions against enemies who could replace losses faster than German guns could inflict them. The tactical mathematics that had favoured quality over quantity during the early war years had reversed with devastating finality. Numbers mattered, production capacity mattered, logistics mattered, and in all three categories, Germany was losing. The Panther tank represented the apex of German armoured vehicle design philosophy. Development had begun in 1942 as a direct response to the T-34 shock that German forces experienced on the Eastern Front. Soviet tanks with sloped armour and adequate guns had proven far more effective than intelligence estimates suggested, forcing a complete rethinking of German medium tank design. MAN and Daimler-Benz submitted competing prototypes. The MAN design, featuring the distinctive sloped glacis plate and long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 gun, won approval in May 1942. Production began in January 1943 at MAN's Nuremberg facility, with additional manufacturing at Daimler-Benz, MNH, and Henschel plants as production ramped up through 1943 and 44. The Panther that emerged from this development process was magnificent. The glacis armour, sloped at 55 degrees, provided protection equivalent to 140mm of vertical armour against kinetic penetrators. The long 75mm gun could penetrate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 metres. The Maybach HL 230 engine, producing 700 horsepower, gave the 45-ton vehicle reasonable mobility despite its substantial weight. German tankers who survived their first battles in Panthers reported that the vehicle's combination of armour, firepower, and mobility made it the finest medium tank in the world. American after-action reports confirmed these assessments. Sherman crews reported that engaging Panthers frontally was suicidal unless they could achieve overwhelming numerical superiority or maneuver for flank shots. But the Panther's magnificence came with costs that German industry and logistics could not sustain. Each vehicle required 8,500 man-hours to manufacture. The complex interleaved road wheel suspension, inherited from Tiger tank development, created maintenance nightmares in field conditions. The Maybach engine, powerful but temperamental, demanded specialized maintenance that overtaxed Wehrmacht repair facilities. Final drive assemblies failed with depressing regularity, stranding Panthers that enemy fire had never touched. Production numbers told part of the story. From January 1943 through April 1945, German factories manufactured approximately 6,000 Panthers total. Monthly production peaked at 380 vehicles in July 1944, before Allied bombing and raw material shortages forced production declines through the war's final months. The American M4 Sherman had originated from a completely different design philosophy and industrial context. Development began in early 1941 when the U.S. Army recognized that its existing M3 Lee medium tank, with its awkward sponson-mounted 75mm gun, would be obsolete before it entered combat. The Sherman design prioritized several factors that seemed almost mundane compared to German concerns about optimal armor geometry and maximum gun penetration. The tank needed to be mechanically reliable enough for crews with minimal training to operate and maintain. It needed to use automotive components already in mass production or easily manufactured using existing American industrial capacity. It needed to be small enough and light enough for shipment overseas in the cargo holds of Liberty ships and landing craft. It needed to be simple enough that multiple manufacturers could produce it simultaneously without extensive retooling. Chrysler, Fisher Body Division of General Motors, Federal Machine and Welder Company, Pressed Steel Car Company, Lima Locomotive Works, American Locomotive Company, Baldwin Locomotive Works, and Pacific Car and Foundry Company all produced Shermans using the same basic design with minor variations based on available components. The M4, with a welded hull, used a Continental R 975 radial engine. The M4A1 with a cast hull used the same engine. The M4A2 used twin General Motors 6 to 71 diesel engines. The M4A3 used a Ford GAA V8 engine. The M4A4 used a Chrysler multibank engine consisting of 5 automobile engines joined together. This parts flexibility, which would have horrified German engineers trained to value precision and optimization, gave American production and resilience that proved decisive. When one engine type faced production bottlenecks, factories simply switched to alternatives without disrupting Sherman output. When one manufacturer encountered difficulties, others compensated. The system prioritized output over perfection, and the output was staggering. In 1942, American factories produced 6,131 Shermans. 1943 saw 21,755 Shermans roll off production lines. Through November 1944, production exceeded 15,000 vehicles for that year alone. From February 1942 through July 1945, American industry manufactured approximately 49,735 Sherman tanks total. The numbers represented an industrial capacity that Germany simply could not match. While German factories struggled to produce 6,000 Panthers over 27 months, American plants delivered nearly 50,000 Shermans. The quality differential that German tankers observed on battlefields was real and measurable, but it was also irrelevant when confronted with production ratios exceeding 8-to-1. Oberst Müller's testing at Kummersdorf had documented the Panther's armor superiority with scientific precision. What his report couldn't capture was the larger strategic reality those test results existed within. Every Panther that rolled off German production lines represented an engineering triumph. Every Sherman that rolled off American production lines represented an industrial inevitability. The Sherman's mechanical design reflected American automotive engineering principles, refined through decades of mass-market automobile production. The Continental R975 radial engine that powered the standard M4 was a derivative of aircraft engines already in production. It produced 400 horsepower, adequate but not exceptional for the 33-ton vehicle. The real advantage came from the engine's simplicity and reliability. The R975 used conventional automotive technology that any mechanic with basic training could maintain and repair. The cooling system, lubrication system, fuel delivery, and ignition all followed standard internal combustion engine principles. Parts were interchangeable between engines. Tolerances were loose enough that field repairs using improvised tools remained possible. The engine ran at conservative power outputs that extended service life and reduced catastrophic failures. The transmission, final drives, and suspension all followed the same design philosophy. The vertical volute spring suspension used 3 sets of paired road wheels per side, connected to vertical springs mounted inside the hull. The system was crude compared to sophisticated German torsion bar designs, but it was also nearly indestructible and required minimal maintenance. Final drives were simple, robust units that could withstand abuse that would destroy more refined German assemblies. The result was a tank that could operate for months with only basic preventive maintenance. Oil changes, track adjustments, and routine inspections kept Shermans running through conditions that left Panthers stranded. The mechanical reliability that Müller had noted almost dismissively during his Kummersdorf evaluation represented the Sherman's most decisive advantage. Wehrmacht maintenance records from late 1944, captured after the war, revealed the brutal arithmetic of mechanical reliability in sustained combat operations. A panzer company equipped with 17 Panthers could expect an average operational readiness rate of 56%. That meant 9 or 10 vehicles actually capable of combat operations on any given day. The remaining 7 or 8 sat in repair facilities, waiting for replacement parts, specialized tools, or skilled mechanics who possessed knowledge of the Panther's complex systems. An American armored battalion equipped with 53 Shermans maintained operational readiness rates, averaging 87%. That meant 46 vehicles ready for immediate combat deployment. The 11% mechanical loss rate came primarily from routine maintenance and minor repairs. that could be completed in hours rather than days. The cumulative effect of this reliability differential compounded across weeks and months of sustained operations. German armoured units fought perpetually under strength, their paper strength impressive but their actual combat power degraded by mechanical attrition. American armoured units maintained combat effectiveness through prolonged campaigns because their vehicles kept running. The Panther's final drive assemblies illustrated the problem with painful clarity. The unit connected the transmission's output to the drive sprockets that moved the tracks. German engineers had designed the final drive to handle the Panther's substantial weight and power output, but they had underestimated the stresses of actual combat operations. The units failed with depressing regularity, typically after 150 to 250 kilometers of operation. Replacing a failed final drive required removing the vehicle's entire side armor panel, disconnecting the track, and using specialized tools to extract the damaged unit. The process consumed 16 to 20 man-hours under ideal workshop conditions. In field conditions, with limited tools and improvised facilities, repairs could take days. Many Panthers were simply abandoned when final drives failed during retreats because repair capacity didn't exist. The Sherman's final drives, simpler and more robust, routinely lasted for over 1,000 kilometers of operation. When they did fail, replacement required basic mechanical skills and standard tools. A trained crew could complete the repair in 4 to 6 hours without specialized equipment. The interleaved road wheel suspension that gave Panthers their smooth ride and reduced ground pressure created another maintenance nightmare that Sherman designers had wisely avoided. Each Panther carried 16 road wheels per side, arranged in overlapping pairs that distributed the vehicle's weight across a wider track surface. The engineering was elegant, and the performance advantages were real. Ground pressure measured 0.83 kilograms per square centimeter, compared to the Sherman's 1.04 kilograms per square centimeter. But that marginal advantage disappeared when mud, snow, or debris accumulated between the overlapping wheels. Eastern Front winter conditions turned the interleaved suspension into a mechanical death sentence. Mud would pack between the wheels during daytime operations, then freeze solid overnight. Morning found Panthers, with their suspensions locked immobile, wheels bridged together by ice, that had to be carefully melted using blowtorches before the vehicles could move. The process consumed hours of precious time and exposed maintenance crews to enemy fire while they worked on immobilized vehicles. Soviet forces learned to launch attacks at dawn when German Panthers sat frozen and helpless, their sophisticated engineering transformed into a liability by simple thermodynamics. Even without freezing conditions, the interleaved wheels created maintenance burdens that consumed man-hours. Wehrmacht repair facilities couldn't spare. Changing a single damaged inner road wheel required removing up to 5 outer wheels first. The process took 3 to 4 hours under ideal conditions. Combat damage that would require 30 minutes of repair work on a Sherman consumed an entire afternoon on a Panther. The Sherman's simple bogie suspension, with its 6 independently mounted road wheels per side, avoided all these problems. Wheels could be individually replaced in under an hour. Mud and debris fell away naturally during movement. Freezing temperatures created inconvenience rather than catastrophic immobilization. The system was crude and unsophisticated, exactly like the automotive components it was derived from, and exactly as effective as crude simplicity needed to be. By October 1944, the cumulative weight of these reliability differentials had transformed tactical mathematics across both fronts. German intelligence reports from Normandy documented American armored divisions advancing with Sherman operational rates exceeding 85%. Wehrmacht panzer divisions in the same theatre struggled to maintain 50% operational rates, despite shorter supply lines and proximity to German industrial centres. The gap wasn't combat losses, it was mechanical sustainability. American tankers drove their Shermans hard, covering hundreds of kilometres during the breakout from Normandy and the race across France. The tanks kept running, because they were designed to keep running. German tankers nursed their Panthers through each kilometre, knowing that aggressive operation accelerated mechanical failures their overstretched maintenance system couldn't handle. Oberst Müller received supplementary orders on October 8, 1944, Kummersdorf's captured Sherman would undergo extended operational testing to evaluate reliability under simulated combat conditions. The test protocol called for 500 kilometers of mixed terrain operations, including road marches, cross-country movement, and tactical maneuvers that replicated battlefield conditions. The testing began October 12, with a road march from Kummersdorf to the Grafenwöhr training area, 180 kilometers to the south. Müller assigned the same crew that had conducted the original firing tests, experienced Panzer soldiers who understood how to operate armored vehicles under demanding conditions. Feldwebel Schmidt, serving as driver, noted in his log that the Sherman's controls felt lighter and more responsive than comparable German tanks. The clutch required less pedal pressure. The transmission shifted smoothly without grinding. The steering levers moved easily, allowing precise control without the upper body strength that Tiger and Panther drivers needed for prolonged operations. The Continental engine ran at a steady hum throughout the march, maintaining highway speeds without strain. Oil pressure remained constant. Engine temperature stayed well within normal operating range despite October's unseasonably warm weather. The crew stopped twice for fuel, noting that the Sherman consumed gasoline at a reasonable rate given its weight and engine displacement. They arrived at Grafenwöhr after 7 hours of continuous operation. Schmidt performed routine post-movement checks, examining the tracks, road wheels, suspension components, and engine compartment for signs of stress or failure. He found nothing, requiring immediate attention. A single track connector pin showed slight looseness that he corrected in 10 minutes using basic hand tools from the Sherman's onboard toolkit. The cross-country phase began the following morning. The test route covered 80 kilometers of mixed terrain, including agricultural fields, forested areas, stream crossings, and steep grades that tested the vehicle's mobility and mechanical durability. German test observers followed in a Schwimmwagen, documenting the Sherman's performance. The American tank handled the varied terrain with unremarkable competence. It wasn't exceptionally fast or particularly agile. The narrow tracks limited flotation in soft ground compared to Panthers with their wider tracks and lower ground pressure. The vertical volute suspension transmitted more vibration to the crew than sophisticated torsion bar systems. Everything about the Sherman's performance was adequate rather than optimal. But adequate proved sufficient. The tank completed the 80-kilometer course in 4 hours and 20 minutes without mechanical difficulty. No track brakes, no suspension failures, no overheating, no transmission problems. The crew reported that the vehicle remained controllable and responsive throughout the test despite the demanding conditions. Müller made detailed notes comparing the Sherman's performance to equivalent German vehicles under similar testing protocols. A Panther executing the same cross-country route typically experienced at least one significant mechanical issue requiring field repairs. Track connector pins worked loose from the stresses of rough terrain. Final drive temperatures climbed alarmingly during sustained high-power operation. Interleaved road wheels accumulated debris that required clearing before the vehicle could continue. The Sherman simply kept running. Its mechanical simplicity meant fewer components that could fail. Its conservative engineering meant components operated well within their stress limits. Its automotive-derived design meant parts could withstand abuse that would damage more refined assemblies. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The tactical maneuver phase tested the Sherman under conditions, simulating actual combat operations. The scenario involved rapid repositioning movements, emergency stops and starts, extended high-speed road marches, and aggressive cross-country navigation that replicated battlefield demands. German test crews pushed the American tank hard, deliberately stressing systems to identify failure points and mechanical limitations. The Sherman absorbed the punishment without protest. The engine continued its steady hum. The transmission shifted cleanly under load. The tracks remained properly tensioned despite rapid direction changes and emergency braking. After 3 days of aggressive operations covering 240 kilometers, the vehicle showed no signs of mechanical degradation. Schmidt performed a comprehensive inspection on October 16th, examining every major component for wear, stress damage, or incipient failure. The final drive housings remained cool to the touch, indicating no bearing distress or lubrication problems. The suspension showed normal wear patterns consistent with the accumulated mileage. The engine compartment revealed no oil leaks, coolant seepage, or deteriorating gaskets. He documented his findings in technical language that couldn't quite hide his professional admiration. Vehicle demonstrates exceptional mechanical durability under sustained high-stress operations. All major systems remain within normal operational parameters. No specialized maintenance procedures required. All repairs completed using standard tools and basic mechanical knowledge. Muller sat in his office at Grafenwöhr that evening, reviewing test data that challenged fundamental assumptions about armored vehicle design philosophy. The Sherman was inferior to the Panther in virtually every combat performance metric. Its armor was thinner, its gun was weaker, its mobility was adequate rather than exceptional. By every measure that Wehrmacht doctrine valued, the American tank was second-rate. But the reliability data told a different story. The Sherman could operate continuously for weeks with minimal maintenance. It could be repaired by crews with basic automotive knowledge using standard tools. It could absorb battle damage and continue fighting because its simple systems had no single points of catastrophic failure. Most importantly, it could be manufactured in quantities that made individual vehicle losses strategically irrelevant. Muller added a section to his evaluation report that departed from the standard technical format. He wrote, "The American M4 Sherman represents a fundamental challenge to traditional German armored warfare doctrine. Our emphasis on vehicle-to-vehicle combat superiority has led to designs that excel in individual engagements but fail in sustained operations due to mechanical complexity and production limitations. The Sherman's design prioritizes operational sustainability over tactical superiority. This approach proves more effective in prolonged campaigns, where cumulative mechanical reliability determines strategic outcomes more surely than superior armor or armament." His superiors in Berlin read the report with skeptical interest. The tactical situation in late October 1944 allowed no room for philosophical debates about design philosophy. German armored forces needed every available tank to contest Allied advances that were grinding inexorably toward the Reich's borders. Muller's observations about American industrial capacity and mechanical reliability seemed almost irrelevant when Panthers could kill 3 or 4 Shermans before being destroyed themselves. But the numbers emerging from actual combat operations across both fronts told a story that Muller's Kummersdorf testing had predicted with uncomfortable accuracy. Wehrmacht after-action reports from Normandy, compiled through August and September 1944, documented the arithmetic of armored attrition warfare. In a typical engagement, a Panther company with 12 vehicles would engage an American armored force and achieve tactically favorable kill ratios. German tank commanders reported destroying 3 to 5 Shermans for each Panther lost. The after-action reports documented these successes with careful precision, noting the ranges at which kills were achieved, the effectiveness of Panther armor against return fire, and the superior training of German tank crews. What the reports couldn't capture was what happened after the engagement ended. The American battalion that had lost 5 Shermans would receive replacement vehicles within 48 hours. The tanks would arrive via Liberty ships that delivered hundreds of vehicles to French ports every week. The crews would be adequately trained replacements who'd learned tank operation at stateside training facilities that graduated thousands of tankers every month. Within 3 days, the American unit would return to full operational strength. The German Panther company that had achieved the tactically impressive kill ratio would face a very different reality. The 2 Panthers damaged during the engagement would require weeks of repair work using parts that might not exist in Wehrmacht supply depots. The 1 Panther lost to catastrophic battle damage couldn't be replaced because monthly production couldn't keep pace with combat losses. The remaining 9 vehicles would face the next engagement under strength, their tactical superiority eroded by simple arithmetic. Over weeks and months of sustained operations, this attrition mathematics compounded with brutal finality. American armored divisions maintained combat strength through replacement pipelines that delivered vehicles faster than combat consumed them. German panzer divisions bled strength with each engagement, their paper organization increasingly divorced from actual combat capability. The production data that had seemed so abstract during strategic planning sessions in 1942 and 43 now demonstrated its decisive importance. American factories produced roughly 8 Shermans for every Panther that German industry manufactured. That 8-to-1 production ratio meant American forces could afford to trade vehicles at tactically unfavorable rates and still achieve strategic victory through sheer numerical superiority. The mechanical reliability differential amplified this production advantage even further. A Sherman that remained operational for months without major repairs represented sustained combat power that could be applied continuously across extended campaigns. A Panther that spent 40% of its service life in maintenance facilities represented theoretical combat power that existed on paper but not on battlefields. German operational records from Army Group B, responsible for defending against Allied advances in France and the Low Countries, documented the cumulative impact with depressing clarity. On November 1, 1944, the Army Group reported 273 Panthers on organizational strength. Of those vehicles, 116 were operational and ready for combat. The remaining 157 sat in various stages of repair, awaiting parts, specialized maintenance, or transport to rear area facilities with equipment necessary for complex repairs. American 1st and 3rd Armies, operating in the same theater, reported 943 Shermans on organizational strength with 823 operationally ready. The operational readiness rate of 87% represented the Sherman's mechanical sustainability advantage. The raw numerical superiority of over 7 operational Shermans for every operational Panther represented American industrial capacity's decisive impact. Wehrmacht intelligence officers studying American armored operations identified another advantage that German procurement philosophy had never adequately considered. The Sherman's design standardization across multiple manufacturers meant that parts, training, and maintenance procedures remained consistent regardless of which factory had produced a specific vehicle. A mechanic trained on Detroit-built M4A3 variants could service Lima Locomotive Works M4A1 variants using the same procedures and tools. German armored forces operated a bewildering variety of vehicle types, each with unique maintenance requirements and parts inventories. Panzer divisions fielded Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IVs, Stug assault guns, Marder tank destroyers, and captured vehicles pressed into service out of desperate necessity. Maintenance facilities needed, completely different parts inventories and specialized knowledge for each vehicle type. The logistical complexity consumed resources and limited operational flexibility in ways that never appeared in after-action reports, but determined outcomes as surely as armor thickness and gun penetration. The final phase of Kummersdorf's Sherman testing involved simulated battle damage repairs under field conditions. Muller's team deliberately inflicted various types of damage that Panthers commonly experienced during combat operations, then evaluated how quickly crews could restore the vehicle to operational status using only the tools and parts available in forward maintenance units. Test 1 involved a thrown track, simulating the kind of mechanical failure that occurred when vehicles maneuvered aggressively across rough terrain. The test crew, using only the tools stored aboard the Sherman itself, repaired the track in 42 minutes. The procedure required no specialized knowledge beyond basic understanding of tracked vehicle operation. A Panther experiencing the same failure typically required 2 to 3 hours for repairs due to the interleaved wheel design that complicated track access. Test 2 simulated engine damage by disconnecting several critical components and requiring the crew to diagnose and repair the problem. The Continental R975's conventional automotive design meant the crew could identify the issue through logical troubleshooting, following standard internal combustion engine principles. They restored the engine to operation in 93 minutes, using replacement parts from standard Wehrmacht motor pool stocks that happened to be compatible with American automotive specifications. A comparable repair on a Panther's Maybach HL 230 engine would have required specialized knowledge of the engine's unique systems and German-specific replacement parts that might not exist in forward supply depots. Many Panthers with repairable engine damage were abandoned during retreats, simply because field maintenance units lacked the expertise or components necessary for repairs. Test 3 involved replacing a damaged road wheel. The Sherman's independently mounted wheels meant the crew could unbolt the damaged unit, slide a replacement into position, and secure it with basic hand tools. Total repair time, 37 minutes. A Panther requiring an inner road wheel replacement faced the tedious process of removing multiple overlapping outer wheels before accessing the damaged component. The repair consumed 4 to 5 hours and required specialized tools that forward maintenance units often lacked. Muller summarized the repairability testing in stark terms. The American tank can be maintained by adequately trained crews using basic automotive knowledge and standard tools. The Panther requires specialized expertise and purpose-built components that our current logistics system cannot reliably provide to forward units. This fundamental difference in maintainability determines operational availability more significantly than combat performance differentials. The winter of 1944 to 1945 brought Germany's armored force sustainability crisis into sharp, undeniable focus. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes offensive that Allied forces would call the Battle of the Bulge, represented Germany's final major armored operation of the war. The offensive would demonstrate with brutal clarity why mechanical reliability mattered more than tactical superiority. German planning for the Ardennes attack allocated substantial Panther resources to spearhead formations. 6th SS Panzer Army and 5th Panzer Army together fielded approximately 400 Panthers among their armored strength. The vehicles represented months of accumulated production, carefully husbanded reserves, and vehicles pulled from other fronts where they were desperately needed. The offensive launched on December 16, 1944, achieving tactical surprise that drove deep penetrations into American lines. Panther formations executed their designed role brilliantly during the initial phases, their superior armor and guns destroying Sherman units caught in vulnerable positions. The kill ratios that resulted reinforced German confidence in their technical superiority. Individual Panthers accounted for multiple Sherman kills, validating the design philosophy that prioritized combat effectiveness over producibility. But within 72 hours, the mechanical realities that Muller had documented at Kummersdorf began asserting themselves with devastating effect. Panthers broke down from mechanical failures as frequently as from combat damage. Final drives failed under the stress of sustained high-speed road marches over icy roads. Transmissions gave out from aggressive operation. Engines overheated despite freezing temperatures because cooling systems couldn't handle prolonged maximum power output. Most critically, German fuel shortages meant Panthers sat immobilized, not from battle damage, but from empty fuel tanks. The Maybach HL 230 consumed fuel prodigiously, and the offensive's rapid advance had outrun Wehrmacht logistics capabilities. Panthers, designed to operate with carefully planned fuel supplies, found themselves stranded when the realities of mobile warfare disrupted supply lines. By December 23, just 1 week after the offensive began, operational Panther strength had dropped to approximately 180 vehicles. The losses weren't primarily combat casualties. They were mechanical failures, fuel exhaustion, and logistical breakdown. Panthers sat abandoned along Belgian roads, their crews unable to repair complex mechanical failures with the limited tools and parts available. Other Panthers were deliberately destroyed by their own crews when fuel shortages made recovery impossible. American armored units that had absorbed devastating losses during the offensive's initial days recovered with remarkable speed. Sherman replacements arrived via established supply lines that continued functioning despite tactical setbacks. Damaged Shermans were recovered and repaired by maintenance units using standard parts and procedures. Within 10 days of the offensive's start, American armored strength in the Ardennes sector had actually increased despite continuous combat operations. The Bulge demonstrated the Sherman's most decisive advantage in terms that even skeptical Wehrmacht officers couldn't ignore. The American tank could be lost and replaced faster than German industry could manufacture Panthers. It could be damaged and repaired faster than Wehrmacht maintenance facilities could service complex German vehicles. It could operate continuously because its mechanical reliability didn't require the careful nursing that Panthers demanded. Oberst Müller received orders on January 8, 1945, to evacuate Kummersdorf, proving ground ahead of approaching Soviet forces. The captured Sherman, still mechanically sound after months of testing, was driven under its own power to a rear area facility. The Panther that had served as the ballistic test target sat immobilized with final drive failure, waiting for replacement parts that would never arrive. The irony wasn't lost on Müller or his staff. The final production statistics, compiled after Germany's surrender, told the complete story that tactical combat reports had obscured. From January 1943 through April 1945, German industry produced approximately 6,000 Panthers. American factories manufactured roughly 49,700 Shermans from February 1942 through July 1945. The 8-to-1 production ratio represented industrial capacity differentials that no amount of tactical superiority could overcome, but the numbers only told part of the story. Of those 6,000 Panthers produced, Wehrmacht records suggest only about 40% remained operational at any given time due to maintenance requirements and mechanical failures. Of the nearly 50,000 Shermans produced, operational readiness rates averaged 85% throughout the war. The effective deployed strength ratio was even more lopsided than production numbers suggested. For every operational Panther on a battlefield, American forces could field roughly 17 operational Shermans. The tactical superiority that allowed one Panther to destroy 3 or 4 Shermans in favorable engagements became strategically irrelevant when facing 17-to-1 numerical disadvantage. German tank crews who survived the war consistently reported that the Panther was the finest medium tank they ever operated. Its armor protection, gun performance, and mobility when properly maintained exceeded anything Allied forces fielded. But those same veterans also reported that mechanical reliability problems meant they spent more time repairing their vehicles than fighting in them. American tanker veterans offered a very different perspective on the Sherman. They acknowledged its tactical limitations, particularly the inability to penetrate German heavy armor frontally. They understood that Sherman crews faced higher casualties in head-to-head engagements with Panthers and Tigers. But they also reported that their tanks kept running through conditions that destroyed more sophisticated vehicles. When Shermans broke down, crews could fix them. When Shermans were lost, replacements arrived within days. The post-war technical analysis, conducted by American and British intelligence teams examining captured German vehicles, confirmed what Müller's Kummersdorf testing had documented. The Panther represented sophisticated engineering poorly matched to the realities of industrial warfare. Its performance advantages required manufacturing complexity that limited production. Its technical sophistication demanded maintenance expertise that Wehrmacht logistics couldn't provide. Its combat superiority operated within tactical contexts, where numerical inferiority made that superiority increasingly irrelevant. The Sherman represented the opposite design philosophy: adequate performance multiplied by overwhelming numbers and sustained by mechanical reliability. The tank wasn't elegant, its engineering wasn't sophisticated, its tactical capabilities were merely sufficient rather than optimal, but it was exactly what industrial warfare required: a vehicle that could be built by the tens of thousands, maintained by adequately trained crews, and kept operational through months of sustained combat. The reliability differential that seemed almost trivial during Müller's initial testing proved decisive across years of sustained operations. A Sherman that operated for 6 months without major mechanical failures represented 6 months of continuous combat capability. A Panther that spent 40% of its service life awaiting maintenance represented theoretical combat power that never translated to battlefield effectiveness. The strategic implications extended far beyond tank versus tank combat statistics. Germany's armored forces, equipped with tactically superior vehicles, were systematically defeated by Allied armored forces equipped with adequate vehicles available in overwhelming numbers. The defeat wasn't primarily about armor thickness or gun penetration. It was about industrial capacity, mechanical sustainability, and logistical reality. American factories produced Shermans faster than combat destroyed them. German factories couldn't produce Panthers fast enough to replace combat and mechanical losses. American maintenance systems kept Shermans operational, using standard parts and basic procedures. German maintenance systems struggled to service Panthers, using specialized components and complex repairs. American supply lines delivered fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts with industrial regularity. German supply lines, under constant air attack and stretched across vast distances, failed to sustain armored operations. The Kummersdorf tests had revealed these fundamental truths in September 1944, but institutional momentum and doctrinal commitment to quality over quantity prevented meaningful response. Wehrmacht leadership continued prioritizing Panther production, even as evidence mounted that simpler, more producible designs would serve Germany's deteriorating strategic position more effectively. By March 1945, the contrast between German and American armored force sustainability had become undeniable even to the most committed advocates of technical superiority. American armored divisions operating in Germany fielded hundreds of operational Shermans, maintained at high readiness rates through established supply and maintenance systems. German panzer divisions operated at fractions of authorized strength, their surviving Panthers increasingly immobilized by mechanical failures, fuel shortages, and parts unavailability. The final irony came in April 1945, as Allied forces overran German tank factories and discovered warehouses filled with partially completed Panthers, awaiting components that could no longer be manufactured or transported. The vehicles sat there as monuments to engineering sophistication that had failed the fundamental test of wartime production, building enough equipment fast enough to influence strategic outcomes. Oberst Heinrich Müller survived the war and was interviewed by American technical intelligence teams in August 1945. Asked about the Kummersdorf Sherman testing, he spoke with the careful precision of an engineer who had documented truths that doctrine refused to accept. The tests proved what we already knew, Müller told his American interrogators. The Sherman couldn't penetrate our armor. Our Panthers could destroy Shermans at ranges where return fire was ineffective. Every tactical engagement demonstrated German technical superiority. But we were answering the wrong question. The relevant question wasn't which tank won individual engagements. It was which tank could be produced in sufficient numbers, maintained under field conditions, and kept operational through months of sustained combat. By those measures, the Sherman was superior because it was designed to win wars rather than battles. The interviewing officer, a U.S. Army captain who had commanded Shermans through France and Germany, appreciated Müller's assessment. American tankers had lived the reality that German engineers had documented but failed to address. They had fought in tanks they knew were tactically inferior, but they had won because tactical inferiority multiplied by overwhelming numbers defeated tactical superiority constrained by production limitations and mechanical complexity. The Sherman remained in American service through the Korean War, demonstrating the longevity that simple, reliable design enabled. Modified versions served in Israeli, South American, and Asian armies into the 1970s. The tank that German engineers had dismissed as crude and inadequate outlasted the sophisticated Panthers by decades because mechanical sustainability mattered more than tactical perfection. The last operational Panthers were scrapped in the late 1940s, their complex systems too demanding for peacetime militaries to maintain. The vehicles that had dominated tactical engagements couldn't survive the peace because they required industrial support systems that only wartime Germany had maintained. Their sophistication, which had seemed like such a decisive advantage, proved to be a fatal weakness when confronted with the realities of sustained operations. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The lesson that emerged from Kummersdorf's testing and 4 years of armored combat was simple but profound. In industrial warfare, adequate performance that could be mass-produced, easily maintained, and continuously replaced defeated superior performance constrained by manufacturing complexity and mechanical fragility. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of World War II by any tactical measure, but it was exactly the right tank for the war that was actually fought, and that made all the difference. German engineers had built magnificent machines optimized for the war they imagined. Limited engagements where quality determined outcomes. American engineers had built adequate machines optimized for the war that existed. Sustained industrial conflict where quantity, reliability, and sustainability determined victory. The Panther's superiority in individual combat proved irrelevant when confronted with Sherman's superiority in everything that mattered for winning a multi-year global war. September 23, 1944. The tests at Kummersdorf had proven exactly what German doctrine expected. The Sherman couldn't penetrate Panther armor, but Oberst Müller's marginal observation about mechanical reliability had proven far more important than the ballistic test results everyone had focused on. The war wouldn't be won by the tank with the thickest armor or the most powerful gun. It would be won by the tank that kept running when sophisticated engineering failed, that could be replaced faster than combat destroyed it, and that could be maintained by ordinary soldiers rather than specialized experts. The Sherman was that tank, and that's why, despite losing nearly every tactical engagement against Panthers, it helped win the war, while the magnificent Panther helped Germany lose it.